This podcast series is full of difficult and troubling content from the start. It includes strong language, deals with themes of child loss and sickness, and could be triggering.
Eyes open wide, looking up to heaven with a tear in my eye.
You would be forgiven for thinking Richard Ashcroft from The Verve sounds a bit out of tune. But that is actually Dr. Ravi Jayaram, neonatal consultant at the Countess of Chester Hospital, singing with his band, The Deluded.
Before the trials of Lucy Letby, Dr. Jayaram was a face on the telly. A TV doctor on Good Morning Britain, he also popped up on The X Factor, The One Show, and more recently danced on the National Lottery Big Night of Musicals, dressed as a clown.
But he hit the big time, not in showbiz, but as an angel of mercy, one of the four consultants who, the story goes, stopped a serial killer in her tracks. He worked with Lucy Letby on the neonatal unit for years before he grew suspicious of her.
Initially, there was a feeling of thank goodness Lucy was on, because she's really good in a crisis, she's really good at managing these things. But as time progressed, the thoughts started springing into our heads. Could she be doing something deliberately?
The journalists who covered the trials bought the Crown story, big time. Heroic doctors like Dr. Jayaram battled to get management to sit up and take notice of a serial killer nurse.
That was the doctor's narrative. But in journalism, context matters. The jurors who convicted Lucy Letby never got to hear what we revealed in our first episode, A Hospital Full of Shit, about the deadly significance of the shit in the sinks, about the killer bacteria in the unit, about a high-risk report on the sewage threat which never saw the light of day.
Instead, the journalists focused their energies on the official story, that Lucy Letby must be a serial killer. In this episode, we will carry out a critical examination of the four doctors at the neonatal unit who accused Lucy Letby. They are Dr. Stephen Breary, Dr. John Gibbs, Dr. B, a female doctor who enjoys lifelong anonymity for legal reasons we cannot report, and the lead singer of The Deluded, Dr. Ravi Jayaram.
Did the doctors who pointed the finger at Lucy Letby, did they have their own secrets to hide? Were their reputations on the line? Did they have skin in the game? Welcome to our podcast, Was There Ever a Crime? The Trials of Lucy Letby, Episode 2, The Deluded.
Baby Noah Robinson arrived at the Countess of Chester Hospital in March 2014, a year before Lucy Letby's first alleged murder. The story of what happened to him in the neonatal unit is doubly shocking, for what we know and what we don't know.
Baby Noah's mum, Melanie Robinson, developed preeclampsia, a potentially lethal condition, so the baby was born by caesarean section 12 weeks early, weighing a tiny 1 pound and 7 ounces. A normal baby will weigh around 7 pounds. Still, babies born that tiny can and do survive if properly treated at the hospital. At the Countess of Chester neonatal unit, that didn't happen.
These are the words of Noah's mum, Melanie, reported by the Daily Mail. In Noah's case, staff shortages meant blood tests and x-rays were not assessed for 7 hours, and there was one doctor on duty who was splitting his time between the neonatal ward and the children's ward.
At baby Noah's inquest, it came out that his breathing was poor, so doctors at the neonatal unit decided to put him on oxygen. But doctors placed a breathing tube in his gullet, which leads to the tummy. It should have gone in his trachea, to the lungs. This was a terrible mistake to make. The doctors decided that the monitors showing that baby Noah's oxygen level was dangerously low were faulty, not that they'd put the tube in wrong. That was a second terrible mistake to make. The doctors, the inquest was told, ignored 5 warning signs from x-rays and other equipment, all pointing out their mistake.
The coroner, Nicholas Reinberg, said, There were considerable signs the tube was incorrectly positioned, and I find it surprising these signs were not realised. He said the assumption that the monitor was at fault was extraordinary. The coroner asked, shouldn't the first assumption be the tube is in the wrong place? Or that's a strong possibility. It's like flying an aeroplane and seeing the oil gauge come on, and you assume the gauge must be wrong, rather than the oil pressure is low.
Was this manslaughter? Putting the oxygen tube down the gullet could have killed the baby. It certainly did it no good at all. The doctors harmed the baby in their care. The coroner decided that it was death by misadventure. Noah's mum said, "We put our trust in the doctors to look after Noah, but they didn't do what they were supposed to do. We feel terribly let down by the NHS. It is good that there is a police investigation and the hospital has gone to them voluntarily."
Who were the doctors at the unit who put the oxygen tube down the gullet, not the trachea, then missed the X-ray and thought the monitors were wrong?
The Countess of Chester Hospital NHS Foundation Trust spokesperson told us, due to the ongoing Thirlwell inquiry and police investigations, it would not be appropriate for us to comment at this time. With regard to your questions about Noah Robinson, we do not comment on individual patients or provide information relating to their medical records due to patient confidentiality and GDPR.
Is it in the public interest to know the identities of the doctors at the Countess of Chester neonatal unit who put an oxygen tube down a baby's gullet and then ignored the signs that they had made a big mistake? Yes, we believe it is. Would it be in the public interest to know the identities of the doctors if, and this is purely hypothetical, if one or more had gone on to accuse Lucy Letby of being a serial killer? Yes, we believe it is. But we don't know which doctors put the oxygen tube down baby Noah's gullet. A Countess of Chester neonatal unit was a place where, it seems, doctors could make mistakes with impunity, but not the nurses. And now for some more showbiz.
Dr. Ravi Jairam is with us now because we're going to talk about this a little bit more, Ravi. So if parents are out there and they're worried that their child may have an underlying heart problem, what are those signs that you should be looking for?
Well, the first thing to stress is that most children won't have an underlying heart problem. Respiratory problems are far more...
That's Ravi Jairam sitting on the famous One Show sofa on the 21st of September 2015, right in the middle of a spike of deaths at the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester.
He was a regular face on our television screens that year. He'd co-hosted Born Naughty on Channel 4. The series ran from the 21st of May 2015 for 3 episodes, where he went around trying to help children with behavioural problems, along with their long-suffering parents.
In the early summer of 2015, Dr. Jairam was a busy bee. He was the full-time clinical lead for the neonates and paediatrics, and he was promoting his Born Naughty show. The first 3 babies to die, blamed on nurse Lucy Letby, the serial killer, passed away in June.
After the management at the Countess of Chester Hospital became aware of the spike in baby deaths, they didn't call in the police, but the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health. They sent in a team of expert doctors to review the neonatal unit, and their report was quietly damning. The experts asked, question, are staffing numbers and competencies appropriate for the acuity of the infants cared for? Answer, no. Although the unit is on paper compliant at consultant level, a high level of activity of the paediatric service means there are only 2 scheduled consultant ward rounds per week on the neonatal unit, yet 5 on the paediatric wards. The investigation reports from the infant deaths showed a pattern of insufficient senior cover. There should have been a greater level of consultant presence on the ward.
The Royal College experts are not overtly critical of the hospital's management on staffing levels. They are, on paper, compliant, but they suggest the consultants are under-servicing the neonatal unit. How professional is 2 scheduled ward rounds per week in a unit looking after premature sick babies? Here's Dr. Roger Norridge, the retired paediatrician who worked with neonatal babies, who we heard from in episode 1.
What's the common practice in the NHS?
It was standard to go around the neonatal ward at least twice a day.
And so the Countess of Chester Hospital are doing it twice a week.
Yes.
Who's wrong?
I believe that I'm right, because the fact that there was so little supervision of the juniors means that many of these babies may have been deteriorating without anybody actually realising. As far as I can see, there were insufficient consultant hours on the neonatal ward.
Is this a real problem? I mean, this isn't going to lead to babies dying.
It could, easily.
Explain that to me.
Well, the signs of illness and deterioration in these babies, particularly the premature babies, are often extremely subtle. People working in neonates have to learn their trade over many years, and recognising the very subtle signs of neonates that are getting sick is a long and difficult job. It takes a lot of hours on the ward.
If you're not there and explaining not only to the junior doctors but also to the nurses what to watch out for twice a day, then standards can really drop.
That would be my view.
But it's not just your view, it's also the view of the Royal College of Paediatricians when they turned up.
Exactly.
Here is how the Daily Mail reported the moment that the hospital leadership finally agreed to allow the police to look at the spike in baby deaths. It demonstrates the pressure that was being put on the consultants and doctors in charge.
Police are investigating the deaths of 15 infants in 12 months at an NHS hospital baby unit criticised for staffing shortages and serious failings. Senior managers at the Countess of Chester Hospital alerted detectives because of a higher than usual death rate among premature and sick newborns at its neonatal unit. The inquiries follow a damning report this year from the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, RCPCH, which found that staffing at the hospital's baby unit was inadequate. It identified significant gaps in medical and nursing rotas, insufficient senior doctor cover, poor decision-making, and a reluctance by some staff to seek advice from colleagues.
So if the consultants were only doing 2 scheduled ward rounds per week rather than 2 per day, what were they up to?
There's lots of people online who are saying that they identified with these characteristics, even as we're speaking now.
Yeah, and I think with Charlie, it wasn't just the fact that he had these outbursts. It was very much other parts of his behaviour.
That's Dr. J. Ram on This Morning with Philip Schofield on the 20th of May 2015. Within 2 weeks of this clip being recorded, the first of the babies that Lucy Letby is accused of killing died.
So did Dr. J. Ram's alternative careers, wannabe rock star with the Deluded and showbiz TV personality, reduce his effectiveness at his day job as neonatal consultant? And did any of the doctors, nurses and parents of the babies complain about his time off? We put those questions to Dr. J. Ram, but at the time of recording, we have not received a reply. Obviously, there were more consultants than just Dr. J. Ram. There were 6 others who were assigned to the unit. Dr. Stephen Breary, Dr. Elizabeth Newby, Dr. John Gibbs, Dr. A male, and Dr. B, a female. As we've said before, Dr. B cannot be named for legal reasons. We do not know the reason for Dr. B being granted anonymity, but we do know the reason for Dr. A.
The married consultant had been Letby's former lover. She was upset when he gave evidence against her. She tried to leave the dock, saying that she was feeling unwell, but the prosecutor Nick Johnson said, "No, it's because you didn't like hearing your boyfriend giving evidence, did you?"
Who would? Please note that during the first trial, long before Lucy Letby was found guilty, she was grilled for having an affair with a doctor, but he was protected from public scrutiny by being granted anonymity. It's almost as if judges, some say, view doctors, and in particular male doctors, as a higher form of being. After the first 3 babies died in June 2015, the 4 accusing doctors at the unit didn't begin to think that their own conduct, their lack of time on the ward, their mistakes, their ignoring of the shit in the sinks, might lead to sick babies dying. It could only be a killer nurse.
Here's Dr. J. Ram again, explaining his thoughts in an exclusive ITV News interview last year.
What was it like when babies started dying and you couldn't understand why?
I've been a paediatrician since 1992, and I had never in my career seen anything like this. And actually, initially, there was a feeling of thank goodness Lucy was on, because she's really good in a crisis, she's really good at managing these things. But as time progressed, the thoughts started springing into our heads. Could she be doing something deliberately?
In July 2015, 1 month after the first 3 deaths, which Lucy Letby was later convicted of causing, doctors met with management and noted that Lucy Letby was present for each death. This was the first time that they had pointed the finger at Lucy Letby. Hospital management did not buy it, and none of the doctors felt so strongly about their suspicions of a serial killer on the ward that they went to the police. Perhaps that was because there was no hard evidence against Lucy Letby at all, and perhaps because there was a lot of evidence that the neonatal unit was in a dire shape.
2 more babies died, one in August and one in October 2015. More internal reviews took place, but found no answers. For 6 out of the 7 deaths, pathologists found natural causes, not foul play. But in 2016, Dr. Stephen Breary produced a duty roster showing that Letby was the only nurse who was on duty for all suspicious deaths and collapses over the year. This was given to hospital bosses before eventually being forwarded to the police.
Suspicious in this context is a heavy word. Ed and I go to meet Peter Elston, a wizard with numbers, a former banker, and someone who just so happens to be a member of the Royal Statistical Society. His mother was a midwife, and Peter has made it his business to cast a sceptical eye over the numbers that helped convict Lucy Letby. The lead police investigator, Detective Superintendent Paul Hughes, said, where's the effect? You look at the statistics, and Lucy's present every time a child dies. 7 babies die. She's on watch for all 7, so she did it. True or false?
Well, that's simply not true. There were many other deaths. There were 10 other deaths during this period that she wasn't charged with.
How would you describe this, what the police have done here? Do you think they've treated her fairly the way they've looked at the statistics?
Absolutely not.
Explain to me, and I'm a bear of simple brain, why they have been unfair.
Because for statistics to be presented properly, need to present all the data, all the deaths. There's missing data. And that immediately makes that the way in which the prosecution was presenting this mortality data as a statistical abhorrence.
Peter used a good analogy to explain what the doctors did to come up with the duty roster, having left so many deaths and collapses out of it.
You shoot randomly a whole bunch of arrows at a wall. You find a few of them, which you're going to by chance, that are quite close together, and you draw a target around them, and you say, aha, there's a pattern there. But of course there isn't, because the arrows were fired at random at this wall.
What you've done is that you have cooked the books. You have created the pattern in your own mind and then fixed the data, falsified the data to support your thesis.
Correct.
Is that what you're saying the Cheshire Police have done?
Correct.
What should they have done?
There's a few aspects to this. One is the fact that there are a whole load of incidents that were not included in that chart. You're not comparing like with like. You're comparing Lucy, who was, even though she was only 27, she was actually one of the most senior nurses there. She did a lot of overtime. She was saving to buy a house. She was single. She had an intensive care qualification, so was more likely to be associated with particularly vulnerable babies. And you're comparing her with agency nurses who may have been part-time, who wouldn't have been allowed anywhere near, that's my understanding, they wouldn't have been allowed anywhere near the particularly unwell babies. So that roster chart is a crock.
So not only was the roster chart that the doctors pulled together incomplete, as in it only included 7 of the 17 deaths which happened in the time period, it also did not factor in that Letby was one of the nurses who was on the ward the most. She was therefore more present than the others she was compared with.
This was acknowledged by one of the doctors who accused her of murder. Here's Dr. John Gibbs, now retired, speaking at the Thirlwall inquiry in October 2024. You don't have to be a perpetrator to be unfortunate and be on duty when sad events keep happening. And I did know that Nurse Letby tended to be around on the neonatal unit a bit more than other nurses because she did extra shifts. But was Lucy Letby actually present at more incidents than statistically she should have been? Here's Peter Elston again.
So let me run something else by you. John O'Quigley, who is a professor of statistics at UCL. John and I, we do quite a lot of collaboration to the extent that, non-professional like me can get involved with a highly qualified statistician like him.
You're being too modest. You're good at numbers.
I've been doing this for years, John. I made a reasonable amount of money for my clients.
By the way, we're living in we're at your house right now. It's a fancy part of North London.
John and I have done a lot of talking. Lucy probably worked around 35% of the time. There's 168 hours in a week. 60-hour weeks are, obviously that's working very hard, but there's pretty clear evidence that she did do 60-hour weeks. So that's 35% of the week.
She is, at that moment, one of the most qualified and most hard-working nurses in the unit.
Correct. So bear with me here. If you look at the number of deaths and collapses that she was charged with, and the number of deaths and collapses that she wasn't charged with, she was charged with 40%, and she was charged with 40% of the collapses. Quite a coincidence, 35, 40, 40. The charges against her is exactly what you would expect if these deaths and collapses were sprinkled at random across all nurses' shifts.
So if you know your statistics, Lucy Letby's presence at the number of deaths and collapses during that time was what you would expect to happen. The roster tells you she put the hours in. It's nothing more sinister than that.
But the doctors who backed the dodgy roster never considered their mistake. Too many babies were dying on their neonatal unit. The only explanation that made sense was foul play. It also just so happened to be a narrative that did not put them in a bad light.
Someone leaked to us a recording of Dr. J-Ram explaining in a talk in Ireland in spring 2024 how he and his colleagues had tried to raise their suspicions about Lucy Letby to the hospital's then chief executive, Tony Chambers. Now, before you think we are picking on Dr. J-Ram by featuring clips from him so much, he has until recently been incredibly prominent in the public eye compared to his colleagues about Lucy Letby. So there is quite a lot of archive to choose from.
The first time we said face-to-face to the chief executive that we were concerned about somebody causing deliberate harm, and this is the first jaw dropper. I recommend you have something to support your chin when it drops. The initial words out of the chief executive's mouth, and sue me if you're listening because I can back this up, were, I can see how that would be a very convenient explanation for you, but surely there must be something else. No, it's really inconvenient if somebody's been causing deliberate harm to babies. And yeah, absolutely, there could be something else. We don't know what it is. Please help us look. But what that comment, I've realised, meant was right at the start, that possibility of however bizarre and unlikely it might have been if somebody causing deliberate harm was shut out.
Towards the end of the talk, Dr. Jairam touches on his career path, or should I say paths.
I'm lucky enough to be at a stage of my career where I could potentially retire now. You're all meant to say, surely not, you look so young. Try that again. I'm at a stage now.
To be honest, Ed, to me, he sounds like a bit of a narcissist. What's more important to him, being a good doctor or making it as a star? After this talk in Dublin, it was reported in several news outlets that Ravi Jairam was working with a production company to create a drama about the Lucy Letby murders. That's showbiz. Tony Chambers resigned as chief executive of the Countess of Chester Hospital when Lucy Letby was arrested. We put Dr. Jairam's allegations to Mr. Chambers, but we have yet to hear back from him.
Tony Chambers wasn't the only person who did not buy the idea that Lucy Letby was a murderer.
The doctors from the Royal College of Paediatrics, we understand, were told the suspicions about Lucy Letby, but it seems they found no good evidence to substantiate the whispering campaign against her. Instead, they pointed their fingers at a unit that was poorly staffed, badly run, and where the consultants didn't do enough scheduled ward rounds.
Let's go back to our lunch with Michelle Warden, who we heard from in episode 1. She was the senior nurse on the neonatal unit who was made compulsorily redundant before Lucy Letby started at the hospital.
And that graph that I believe Steve Breary drew it up doesn't put any of the doctors on it. So why weren't the doctors on it? Because there was a lot of doctors, the SHOs, the registrars, none of them were put on that list. It was only the nurses.
My analogy of that is if you had like a Agatha Christie sort of a Poirot where there was a murderer in a hotel, and you go, right, someone here is the murderer, but you only do a list of the guests. You go, well, it can't be any of the staff. It can't be anyone who's visited. It has to be the guests.
That's a very good point, because
it had to be one of the nurses.
It had to be one of the nurses.
Of course it did not have to be one of the nurses, though when the consultant said they grew suspicious, they seemed to only look at the nurses.
But why was that? Did Tony Chambers, the former chief executive, have a point when, according to Dr. Jairam's version, he told the consultants that he could see how their narrative would be a very convenient explanation for them? Were the consultants trying to divert attention away from how the unit was being run? After all, it did work. The Royal College were clear in their criticisms, but down the track, that was knocked flat by the idea there was a killer at large. Incompetence is boring. Serial killer on the loose? Now that's showbiz.
It seems clear that the accusing doctors never looked at themselves to see if there was anything they were doing, or not doing, that could have been causing the deaths on the ward.
The evidence stacks up that the neonatal unit was a dangerous place for sick babies to be. The shit, the killer bacteria, the lack of scheduled ward rounds reported by the Royal College. All of that seemed to have been ignored by the 4 doctors who suspected foul play.
Instead, they pointed to a dodgy roster which framed Letby as a murderer.
Some might say it wasn't just Dr. Jairam's band that was the Deluded. We asked the doctors at the Countess of Chester Hospital who accused Lucy Letby for comment, but have yet to hear back from them.
On our next episode, we're going to look into the science at the heart of the investigation into Lucy Letby. She was accused of using various fiendishly clever methods to murder or try to murder babies. Yet the evidence for this needs some serious scrutiny.
That's our next episode. Enter Sherlock Holmes. Not. Given the subject of our podcast, we've not been able to get any corporate backers. We're therefore crowdfunding to pay for the production costs. If you're able to support us, the link to the crowdfunder is in our social media. Was there ever a crime? The Trials of Lucy Letby was investigated, presented and produced by me, John Sweeney, and Edward Abel Smith. This is a Chalk and Blade production, co-produced by Jason Phipps and Ruth Barnes. Mix and engineering by Ross Ramsey Golding. Additional editing by Matt Nielsen. Legal services were provided by Sarah Van Dor Mackay. Special thanks to Cleo C. de Oliveira for her help in researching this episode. Thanks to the BBC and ITV for the archive audio which was used in this episode.